I'm going to go right to this gentleman right here at the end of the
Just asking to
yeah.
repeat the questions.
Okay, I will. Sure will. Yeah.
General Flynn, thanks for coming out, enjoying your comments. I fully intend on buying the book. Can you give us an idea, a little prelude to what your plans are to defeat the ideology?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is that, and I start with this, and this really goes after being able to attack the ideology, discredit the ideology. I mean, we still have to do some military operations and the kinds of things that we're doing, but this doesn't mean, you know, more boots on the ground, because I always get asked that question. One of the things that I call for in the book is the creation of a new 21st century alliance. Rabbi Hausman mentioned President al-Sisi of Egypt. President al-Sisi is a good friend of mine. I've known him for a long time. He and I were we were colleagues when I was the senior intelligence officer at U.S. Central Command down in Tampa. We had responsibility for East Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. And al-Sisi was the head of intelligence at that time in the Egyptian military. So he and I became friends, actually. And what I felt like we should have done was we should have embraced him when he gave his great intellectually courageous speech at the Al-Azhar Mosque at the end of about a year and a half ago, beginning of 2015, end of 2014. And Al-Azhar Mosque, for people that don't know, it's kind of like the analogy, it's sort of like the Vatican of the Muslim world. And first time a Muslim leader of a country ever spoke in front of that other than an imam or a cleric. So he stood there and we did not embrace him. We should have embraced him. One of the things that I call for is a new 21st century alliance, and principally putting the burden on the backs of the Arab world. And al-Sisi was calling for that. So there's some steps that we're trying to take right now, actually in the political process, to try to get this idea in place. It will exist. It will exist. Trust me, it will exist, because we have to, the Arab world has to take more responsibility for what's happening. But in order to get there, they're going to need U.S. leadership. But the idea of discrediting the ideology, we spent 40 years discrediting the ideology of communism. 40 years. I mean, I remember as a kid talking, you know, about communists, right, in school and what it meant and what we had to do as a kid growing up. We can't talk about radical Islamism in our school system. I mean, you'd be thrown out, you'd be suspended, you'd be sent home. And then you as parents, with your kids, people would be, you know, wondering about you. You'd be called names. We can't have that. We are facing another ism, just like we face Nazism and fascism and imperialism and communism. This is Islamism, and it is a vicious cancer inside the body of 1.7 billion people on this planet, and it has to be excised. So, and we should not fear this idea. We should define it clearly, and we should go after it. Egypt's having the damnedest time right now, and we should like put al-Sisi on a pedestal. You know, honestly, I mean, we should, because he, you know, it's like the guy is like, he recognizes it for what it is. Now, why? Maybe he spent a lot of time in the West. Maybe because he's got a decent education. Maybe because he's just a guy that gets it. But he recognizes that, hey, and frankly, as I've said very publicly, Egypt is one bullet away from total anarchy. Total anarchy. Al-Sisi gets assassinated, which I know that he's got massive protection around him. But if he goes, there's not some other guy behind him. There's some other people, but there's not somebody like him. That's a problem. It's a problem in that region sometimes, you know, where you don't build, like Israel builds leaders. They invest in their future. These countries, they don't. They don't. They steal. They steal. So they steal from their future. So a guy like al-Sisi, he recognizes that to a degree. And I think that others, the monarchies have a difficult time. You know, and they have to invest in their future. I think that what happened, back to your question, I think that what happened was a smart decision because they looked at the future. They looked at a 30-year-old kid that could be around for 60 more years because he comes from a line that actually lives a long time. They look at that, okay? So maybe he'll be around till he's 90 and he can take Saudi into a new direction. I hope. I mean, I'm hopeful in that. I'm actually talking to a lot of these folks in that country, encouraging them to think like that. And I hope that they do. This 21st century alliance is an alliance where you bring the Muslim nations together, the leaders, so like President al-Sisi, out of Egypt, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is Mohammed bin Salman,
What about
the King of
countries
Jordan.
like, what about Indonesia? I mean,
Indonesia too, Indonesia too. Singapore is actually doing some good work. Indonesia must be brought into this as well. So essentially from Indonesia to Morocco, but there is a tighter shot group where these nations are willing to provide capabilities. They're willing to provide boots on the ground, but they don't know how to organize themselves. They don't know how to lead this type of a coalition. And in a way, if you were to use an analogy, it would be like a sort of an Arab NATO-like, organization. I mean, in a way, people understand NATO, but a new type of one, yeah. And one where the Arab nations have to take some responsibility. They have to be held accountable. They have to step up to the plate.
شكرا لكم على المشاهدة، ولا تنسوا الاشتراك في القناة ومشاهدة الفيديوهات السابقة.